Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar this afternoon. Firstly, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules as well. We really appreciate it here at Sabio for a webinar which is around such a topical topic at the moment. So, which is obviously well-being in the workplace and specifically well-being in the contact centre. So we'll be covering that this afternoon, and we'll also be touching on the science behind Sabio's psychosocial model of advisor wellbeing. My name is Joe O'Brien, and I am the Corporate Communications Manager for Sabio. I've been with the business now for a couple of years. So, and from the registrations, I've spoken to a couple of you, or a number of you, over the past few months. So nice to catch up with you again. Just to give you a little bit of an insight into what we're going to be covering today and the context behind today's webinar. It's really no secret that today's contact centres and the advisors within them are under immense pressure. Personally, a study that I read recently had mentioned that there were, 87% of advisors had reported high or very high stress levels within the contact centre. And in addition to that, half of those advisors had said that they felt, emotionally drained. They had suffered sleep problems. There was, examples of burnout, and they were also unable to meet the constant demands of the job as well. In our opinion at Sabio, addressing that will require a more data-led approach with science-based insights to fully gauge the scale of the challenge that is facing the industry today. So during the webinar today, we'll be looking at the science behind workplace success. We'll be discussing how the workplace well-being isn't about simply making your employees happy, but instead it's about creating the right environment for your employees, understanding their experiences, and supporting their performance as well. Now, admittedly, I am not the expert here, and I am extremely pleased to be joined by my colleague, Dr Phoebe Asquith, who is our resident wellbeing expert within the business, Phoebe. And without, giving the danger of doing you a disservice here, would you mind just introducing yourself to the attendees today?
Of course, yeah. So hi everybody, I'm Dr Phoebe Asquith. I work as a senior business consultant within Sabio with a focus on workplace wellbeing and how we use data to improve workplace wellbeing and how we can create targeted initiatives using psychology and data. And as Joe said, my background's in psychology and in research psychology. So I can take you through a few of my areas of expertise that we'll kind of touch on today. One of them is psychology and cognition. So this is how we process information around us to make decisions. So how are we taking in our environment? How are we using our experience in order to make decisions? And how does that impact our workplace wellbeing? A second area of expertise is on behaviour change. So we're interested in understanding aspects within our environment that impact our behaviour and how we can change our behaviour. So this might include things like teamwork, the culture of a workplace, decision-making and cognitive biases that impact workplace wellbeing. I did a PhD that was focused on cognitive neuroscience. So that was using machine learning to understand and map neural regions. So another key area to my expertise and kind of research interests really is understanding human technology interaction and incorporating predictive analytics into the technology that we use. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about the psychology that sits behind some of the technology that we've developed and how we use data as part of that technology to help predict wellbeing issues based on data from employees themselves and from the workplace. So before I worked at Sabio, I had this kind of academic research background, and I also worked for a company called People Matter. People Matter was acquired by Sabio last year, and the goal of People Matter was to build a model of workplace wellbeing based on psychology and use data to map workplace wellbeing onto that framework within the workplace. Now, when Sabio acquired People Matter a year ago, we've worked on applying that model within the contact centre space specifically, and that's where my roles come in. So as I said, I work as a consultant with organisations to apply this framework of wellbeing, and also to build this technology that can map data to this framework that we've built.
Excellent, thanks Phoebe. So just on the subject of wellbeing and the encouragement of promoting positive wellbeing, particularly in the workplace, so that's been a hot topic in recent years. But what exactly do we mean by wellbeing, and particularly what do we mean when talking about wellbeing in the context of the workplace?
Yeah, it's a really important question. We need to be able to define wellbeing in order to make a really coherent approach to wellbeing across an organisation. And we need to define wellbeing so that we can track and measure wellbeing, as well as understand how we can improve wellbeing. So that was kind of the first key thing that we needed to do when building our framework of wellbeing in order to help organisations. And it's interesting because when you speak to people and ask kind of what do we mean by well-being, if you ask kind of individuals, people usually describe their experience of well-being or a positive well-being. So they'll use phrases like feeling happy or feeling content, having balance, or being able to cope with things in life. So we tend to have a kind of a concept of what well-being feels like when we achieve positive well-being. However, this isn't particularly useful for organisations when we're trying to improve wellbeing. So the first thing that we need to do is to be able to kind of break down what impacts wellbeing. So that's what we mean when we talk about defining workplace wellbeing. It's not the kind of end goal, it's the steps that we need to take, or the elements that contribute to wellbeing that we need to understand. So there's kind of two kind of key areas for doing this. The first, as I said, is kind of understanding the impacts of our well-being. So the first thing that we looked to was what in our environment and what in our experience contributes to our well-being. How can we address well-being to improve things for employees? So how do we pull apart these elements of our environment and our experience to make sure that we have as much as we can in place to support employees? And we need to be able to support employees in terms of mental wellness. So this means employees can have the capacity to deal with things that kind of come up in their day, because when mental wellness is eroded, we see an impact on emotions, we see an impact on employee performance, and with coping skills and things like resilience. We also need to support employees in physical wellness. We know that mental and physical wellness kind of go hand in hand. So keeping mental health prioritised is also helping to keep physical health prioritised, making sure people get enough breaks, that kind of thing. And both of these things, mental and physical wellness, are kind of symptomatic of our wellbeing status. So when we unpack what impacts these areas, we see a really complex set of features that we need to model and provide a framework for. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about those kind of aspects in the framework that we've developed. The second kind of thing that we need to do when understanding what wellbeing is, as well as kind of pulling apart the things that contribute to wellbeing, is making sure that we address the specific things relevant to the workplace that we need to understand. So we can have an idea of what contributes to wellbeing overall, but the work that we're doing is specific to workplace wellbeing. So this means understanding exactly what contributes to workplace stress, workplace burnout, things like performance in the workplace, and specific workplace environmental factors and workplace experiences. We ran a study recently with the CCMA, and we found that over half of agents reported at least one symptom of burnout. So we really recognise that it's key to take all of the research and information that we've got from psychology in order to understand things like workplace burnout, in order to be able to kind of cover workplace specific wellbeing issues within our framework, within our model.
Thanks, Phoebe. And the modern definition of well-being reveals it to be quite, complex and dynamic. But in your opinion and in your experiences, how have we arrived at that? And in addition to that, how has research and psychology helped to form that modern view?
Psychology's had a huge impact on how we understand our modern definition of well-being. And as you said, it's a really complex and dynamic state. And I think just the kind of initial discussion we've had around wellbeing so far starts to pertain to that there are lots of environmental and experiential elements that contribute to wellbeing. But in terms of psychological research that's contributed, the journey it's taken has come from an area of recognizing that we don't just need to look at how we avoid illness. So a lot of psychological research kind of decades ago was, oh, what's wrong with this person if they're experiencing psychosis? What's this mental health problem that somebody's experiencing? How do we avoid that? But over the past few decades, it's changed from that into trying to understand how we can be the best that we can be, or how do we sustain health within psychology. And psychology or psychological theories address this question across multiple areas of interest. So looking at things like cognitive factors, motivation and confidence, things like the impact of skills on workplace wellbeing. Social factors is a huge area within psychology that's been researched. But it's a huge area of research, and often these areas are kind of looked at in silos, and it can be really difficult to bring those together. So I've kind of picked a few examples of theories that have contributed to the journey of the way that we understand well-being from a psychological perspective. So in the 1970s, there was a real focus on positive versus negative effects. So this means seeing happiness as primary importance within well-being, and that's something, as I mentioned earlier, that feels kind of intuitive when we talk about well-being. Happiness is symptomatic of positive well-being, but it's not the whole story. And in the 1970s, 80s, there was another theory that started to focus on the influence of social constructs. So as well as a sense of happiness, we also interpret well-being based on definitions that we have in our social life. So what does health mean? That's often defined within our social construct. What does happiness mean? What does it mean to be happy? For some people that may be kind of feeling elated. For other social groups or cultures, that may be kind of feeling content or feeling without stress. So there's social influences in how we interpret even our own well-being. And in the 1980s, there was a kind of further development of that, where we started to recognize the individualistic nature of well-being within psychology. So well-being started to be understood in terms of personal goals or personal interpretations of your own situation or your own aspirations, that kind of thing. So there wasn't a kind of set level that contributed to well-being, but we need to understand well-being in relation to individuals and their perception of where they are within their life. So you can see, even in those kind of 3 decades, there were some really complex and kind of rich ideas that were being bandied around. In 2007, the WHO tried to kind of pull together as many of the areas within psychology, or many of the areas within psychology, to define quality of life and well-being. And so they defined quality of life as including individuals' perception of their position in life, context of culture, and the kind of goals and expectations or standards that people have, and recognize that all of this is kind of impacted or affected in a complex way by physical health, psychological state, social relationships and environmental features. So psychology has played a huge role, and it's contributed to these international definitions of well-being that we have, but it's not necessarily useful for organizations, or it's difficult for organizations to pull all of this information together. So what's important now, and what we're doing within Sabio and as part of our research and solution, is to bring together and utilize this kind of rich source of information in a way that's really helpful for organization and kind of clarifies the key factors that they need to look at in order to improve workplace wellbeing, because it can be really daunting if you start to look at all that research, because it's, as you said, it's really complex and really dynamic, and even though it's very interesting, it's not necessarily practical to pull all of that information together without a simplified framework.
Yeah, and just on the point of the psychological aspect specifically to the contact centre, so what impact does the everyday environment and experiences have on the well-being of the advisor? So I'm particularly thinking from an environment point of view. The contact centre advisor could be using a clunky or an outdated system, or from an experience point of view, they could be having to manage a constant stream of complex and emotional calls. But in your opinion, what impact does that environment have on the advisor well-being?
Yeah, so we know that the environment and experiences that an employee or an agent has is hugely important and has a direct impact on their well-being. And this was really, really key to our approach at Sabio. We need to highlight the impact of the environment and the impact of the experience at work on employee well-being. And as I said, pull out the key elements from the environment and from the experience that impact well-being. So what specifically is impacting our employees within the environment and within their experience? So as humans, we take in information from around us using our senses all of the time, and we process that information through internal cognitive routes, and the interaction between kind of what's happening out there and our internal experience and how we kind of process this information is really, really key. So if our environment is difficult, this creates elevated stress, it puts pressure on our mental resources, it affects our cognitive processes moving forward. We get tired, we're more likely to feel negative and interpret things negatively that happen to us. And if our cognitive resources are depleted, if we are tired, if we're not resilient, if we're not coping, this is going to mean that our environment's processed, like I said, in that negative way, and we'll see our performance dropping and we'll see our mood impacted. So things like working with a clunky system or technology, that's going to have a real impact, especially if we see kind of that happening chronically over time. We're going to see impacts on key areas of well-being that we recognise, such as achievement. So a sense of achievement and accomplishment, we know, is really important for individual well-being. So if you have a system that you don't feel like is supporting a good performance at work, you're going to be left feeling frustrated and you're not doing the job that you want to be doing, and you're going to feel like you've got a lack of control over your performance. But as well as achievement, we know that control is a huge part of well-being. Having a lack of control at work across all areas of work leaves employees feeling disempowered, and can mean that they feel unlikely to be able to cope or manage their well-being. So impacting both their performance and their well-being. And like I said, if that's happening over time, if you've got these chronic stresses, it really builds up and can erode well-being in quite a negative way. Same with the emotionally taxing calls. So over time, we know that having kind of increased adrenaline, when you have people complaining or shouting or being difficult to deal with on the phone, this means that those raised adrenaline and raised levels of stress for the agent can really start to erode again at mood and at well-being overall. So we're less likely to be able to cope, and we're more likely to have an increased stress response when the next call comes in if we don't have something like a break or a way to deal with or kind of reset after those types of interactions.
Yeah, and looking at the volumes of attrition across the contact centre landscape at the moment, and it's obviously quite concerning. I think a recent report I read in some places in Europe, for example, were averaging 30% rates, which is hugely concerning. What are the dangers to our industry, both for the organisation and the individual, if the likes of burnout, presenteeism, absenteeism, if those issues aren't addressed properly?
Yeah, so I think the dangers are kind of fourfold, really. I think the first is personal. So, a really key part of our approach and ethos at Sabio, and as part of the solution, is to empower individuals and employees with their own mental wellness. If we don't support individuals and we see an increase in things like burnout and workplace stress, we're going to see a really high human impact that causes things like hopelessness, high levels of exhaustion, detachment from work, but also from social groups or things kind of outside of work as well. If we don't support employees at work, it can have a wide-ranging impact on a person's life. Mental and physical health is at risk if you're not addressing things like burnout, and we know that burnout is a high cause or a high reason why people leave their work, and it's difficult to lift yourself out of these mental health issues once you've kind of gone too far along that spiral, and if there's no intervention within the workplace. But the good news is that there are flags that we can recognise around workplace stress and around workplace burnout, and there is time to intervene if managers and individuals can recognise those signs. So as I said, those feelings of hopelessness, those physical exhaustion signs, that feeling of detachment, and that's a really key kind of aim of the wellbeing framework that we've developed, is to map data to these types of areas for an employee and for teams to support employees and managers in recognising those red flags and intervening and being able to kind of interrupt these mental health and physical health dangers that might be seen without any intervention at all. The second kind of area is that it's dangerous for is organisations themselves. So as you said, the cost of people leaving and taking time off work can be huge. If you are suffering with stress or burnout, you're much more likely to take leave of absence or need to take time off because of exhaustion and illness. And it also might mean that organisations are unable to attract talent or retain staff. So we know that kind of reputations of organisations are public now. We have things like Glassdoor, and people can report or share their experiences of the workplace, and it can be really difficult for organisations to attract staff if they have these kind of certain reputations online. So it's really important for organisations to get on the front step of this in terms of workplace wellbeing, especially since COVID, when employees have a particular expectation of the type of support that they should get from the workplace. The third area of danger is which is related actually is around customers as well. So we know that customers have a lowered experience if agents are struggling, or if organisations have reduced staff levels. So it ultimately impacts the reputation of the organisation from a customer perspective as well. And as you said, actually at a sector level, it's really dangerous. So even at a sector level, there's a particular reputation that something like a call centre agent role has, that it's boring, that it's repetitive, that it's stressful, that it's difficult. So addressing well-being or kind of workplace experience for your organisation can really help to start to break down and set different bars or expectations for employees coming in, and help to reset that reputation at the sector and organisational level.
Yeah, so obviously Sabio in recent weeks have, we've taken steps and, launched our wellbeing program, which, through our wellbeing companion solution uses psychology and data to address those current challenges that you mentioned previously. Can you tell us a little bit about the psychosocial model that we've adopted for the wellbeing solution, how that was built and how it is used?
Yeah, of course. So as I said earlier, the kind of key reason for building the framework was to help organisations have a systematic way of understanding wellbeing and map data to the framework in order to recognise where they are with their wellbeing, track their wellbeing, and have kind of targeted areas in order to intervene and improve wellbeing or employee experience. So it's this systematic approach to wellbeing, the use of data within wellbeing that's really important as part of this framework. And the reason that we have quite a complex framework is as I mentioned earlier, that we don't want to just help people to feel good. We need specific psychologically based targets that can kind of break down wellbeing for us across the different environmental and experiential areas that we recognise as being important. So the research that we did was with people who'd experienced workplace wellbeing issues. So, but before we did that, we did a large literature review. So as I mentioned earlier, there's many kind of reams of psychological areas that have addressed workplace wellbeing that are really important to recognise as part of any framework that you might build around wellbeing. So identifying key psychological theories that are important. So things like the job demand resource model or behaviour change theories that are relevant to workplace wellbeing. So once we did that, that helped us to recognise the kind of key areas of interest that we had when talking to people who'd suffered with burnout or experienced workplace stress. So we did semi-structured interviews with individuals, and we talked to them about what they had felt had impacted their well-being when at work. What was really kind of key to our understanding was kind of working through environmental aspects and understanding not just what contributed negatively to their well-being, but also what helped people to cope with stressful situations or to come out of a negative place if they'd experienced particular stresses when at work. So once we'd done those interviews, that helped us to identify core themes that contributed to well-being. So they were pressures within our environment, boosts within our environment, so things that help to individuals to regain energy. Something like support within your environment, feeling accomplishment and achievement within your environment. The other areas were emotions, so what particular emotions were being felt or contributed to well-being. So this isn't just happiness and sadness, but it can include things like feeling in flow at work or having energy at work. And the fourth area that we recognised contributed significantly to well-being is behaviours. So as well as things within your kind of emotional experience, your environment at work, there are also behaviours related to your workplace culture and to you as an individual that can help to support workplace well-being. Once we'd kind of recognised those four general areas and the kind of features that sat underneath that, we did a large survey that meant that we could recognise the independence of all of these factors and kind of pull out the really key factors of wellbeing that we wanted to include within our framework. And like I said, that was not just what went wrong or what goes wrong with wellbeing, but what helps. And so when we apply data to this framework, it gives us an idea of where we can address workplace issues based on the scores that different areas kind of have when an individual interacts with the framework.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you mentioned a systematic approach and the use of data in there, Phoebe. There's obviously going to be, concerns around data security, data privacy. Who can actually view that data within the companion solution, and how does that sort of work?
So we collect data from individual employees via a desk-based chatbot. So the desk-based chatbot sits on the desktop of an employee and they respond to particular questions or statements relating to different areas of the model. Now, all of the data that's captured through the Wellbeing Companion is stored securely in a BigQuery database, and it's only accessible for analytical purposes. It's also stored anonymously, and it's aggregated to the team level and presented back at a team level to managers, but this is all at an anonymous group level. So there isn't a way for a manager to be able to see an individual's responses or results associated with a specific individual. So the way that we work with organisations is that we set kind of minimum group size levels. This is usually between 5 and 10 employees. So if you had a group of people or a set of results that was less than 5 people, you wouldn't be able to see those results. And this means that you can't identify individuals kind of via that route either. So we're really it's really important to us to make sure that the anonymity of employees is retained. It's really important also to make sure that people feel comfortable using the companion and feel secure in the knowledge that they can share their kind of personal experiences of the workplace without being able to be identified.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Phoebe. And final question from me. Obviously, from your experience, again, through your academic studies and what you've done from a practical point of view in your career, what advice would you give to organisations that are on this webinar, you know, that are looking to create the right environment to support their employees' well-being?
I think I'd probably pick out 3 kind of key areas for advice, really. I think the first is to create a shared narrative and language around well-being. So this was really important for us, and why we created the Wellbeing framework. So the Wellbeing framework helps us to define well-being, and the other really important thing it does is it means that everybody's on the same page with understanding what well-being is. So when we use certain words like pressures or environmental aspects or you know, energy at work, we all know what we're talking about, and managers, employees, and decision makers or key stakeholders can all be in tune with the way that you talk about well-being and understand the landscape of what's being approached. This also means that you can create a shared responsibility around well-being, so individuals can understand what their role is in supporting their own well-being. So we provide tips and tools and feedback to individuals through that chatbot that mean that they can feel empowered with their own well-being. We provide, like I said, aggregated data back to the managers that can make sure that they feel supported within their role in supporting their teams and supporting their own well-being. And we also provide and have kind of sessions with key stakeholders to make sure that well-being is really tied in with wider business strategy, and kind of making sure that each person understands their role within that well-being conversation, and that they're talking about well-being in the same way is really important. The second is to collect data. So a lot of organisations collect employee engagement data or some workplace well-being data at kind of say 6 monthly intervals or annually, but this often misses the day-to-day impact of the working environment, and often these questionnaires don't focus on things like what in employees' environment is impacting their motivation or well-being. What can we understand about the behaviours and culture in order to be able to support well-being? There are certain areas of workplace environment and experience that aren't often used within data collection within organisations. So having a more, not necessarily comprehensive, but a data collection that's focused around psychological aspects of well-being that we know are important and that can give organisations really tangible areas to work on. And as I said, kind of collecting data on a more continuous basis as and where's possible, which is why we've created this kind of desktop interaction for agents, so we can collect that data, you know, say 2 to 3 times a week from individuals. And that can feed into strategy as well. So this data is really important for decision making and evidencing action at the organisational level, the team level, and for individuals. And I think the third one is to not shy away from wellbeing issues. We know that a lot of organisations are having trouble, as you said, with agent attrition, agent stress, agent burnout, and we really need organisations to be open to change and to recognise why these issues are occurring, and be kind of open-minded in terms of their approach or the way that they adapt and address these issues, because we need to make sure that organisations in the sector is kind of keeping up with what employees are looking for. And this kind of changing landscape and focus on wellbeing mean that it's really critical for organisations to be on the front foot and, like I say, not shy away from these problems, but address them head on with data, and yeah, keep wellbeing as part of that wider business strategy.
Excellent, thanks Phoebe. I'm very conscious we covered a lot of information there, and I'm sure that there are some questions that came through. I can't see any questions. Emily, can you help us out if there is any questions from the attendees?
Yeah, it was just on the Access programme actually. If you could just tell us a little bit more about what the steps would be to take that, or what the initial discussion would first be.
Yeah, so we have an early access programme that we're offering, which is really exciting. That means that organisations can get access to the wellbeing technology and implement it on a kind of pilot project basis. So what we do as part of the early access programme is an initial discovery activity with an organisation, and this is a 3-week consultancy or discovery activity which addresses and helps us to understand where an organisation currently is with their wellbeing. So we look at current strategy within the organisation, we speak to team leaders and team managers, and we speak to employees about their experience and start to map all of that information to the models and frameworks of wellbeing that we have. So we have the model of wellbeing that I've kind of taught through. We also have certain criteria that help us to understand the maturity of the organisational approach and the approach taken by team leaders and managers to address wellbeing. So we start to collate data and findings that help us to benchmark and kind of begin the organisation on their wellbeing journey in order to create next steps and recommendations. So once we've done through those initial stages, so they're kind of focus groups, interviews, workshops, then we roll out the technology within usually a pilot group, so say 250 agents, something like that. And we start to collect data through the Wellbeing Companion, and then we can start to aggregate that and provide that information back to the manager, as well as feedback wellbeing information to the individuals. So after we've collected data, usually for about 6 weeks, then we can aggregate that data and come back to the organisation and managers with insight sessions, training, and we can come up with a specific action plan. We create a report around specific areas of the environment or culture that need to be addressed. And we can start to link in and discuss a wider rollout of the Wellbeing Companion and how it might link in with other workplace data. So we know there's loads of workplace data that's fantastic within the contact centre that we could link this in with, that can help us to predict when particular issues with wellbeing may arise. So things like call data or workplace management information, we can link in with content and information that an organisation already has. So we can, as part of the early access programme, really start to integrate the wellbeing technology that we have with the work that organisations are doing. We know that lots of organisations have lots of great resources that we can utilise, and that we don't, it's not about replacing any of that, it's about pulling all of that together and making sure that it's being used in the best way, and being used and the evidence and its used with that data that we can collect through the Wellbeing Companion. So the early access programme altogether lasts about 12 weeks. And it has those discovery and technology and training and action plan phases. So yes, that should give a bit of an overview.
That's great, thank you, Phoebe. That is actually it for now, but if anyone does have any further questions, we will be sending a follow-up email with a recording of the webinar, so please feel free to reach out.
Thanks everyone. Yeah, really appreciate your time there. I think it's proven that wellbeing does remain a prominent discussion and topic in our industry. And as Emily says, there will be a follow-up email where you can have a look at other sort of wellbeing related assets from Sabio. And alternatively, if you'd like as well, if you'd like to sort of find out more about what's been discussed today, or to have further discussions with any of our internal wellbeing team, then yeah, please get in touch. We'd be glad to hear from you. But thanks again for giving up your time, and we'll speak to you soon. Thanks, Phoebe. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Bye.